I think Depp will feel pretty good about this regardless, a year from now, how the jury had decided the case. I think Heard feels that this has been a very painful process regardless of the outcome of the case. So if we toss aside what the jury verdict is, it's certainly been difficult for both sides, but it's been much more painful, as it always is, for the defendant to have to address this case. There's a lot of suffering that goes on, suffering meaning, again, expenses, time, anguish, all the pieces that go into this to try to defend yourself. It is very difficult to prove actual malice in a case, and particularly when there are a whole lot of elements involving a combative relationship. It's just so hard to then come back and say what was written in this piece about I've experienced some of this myself, that you can then say it was not only not true, but it was done with actual malice to go after somebody. It's not impossible, but it's meant to have a high standard, again, because what we want is this robust, open discussion, and we want to provide freedom of expression, again, to use the terms, but Justice Brennan, we want to give freedom of expression some breathing room. So the jury had to determine then that that person made this up to such an extent that there was no way we could have seen that there was any abuse in this type of relationship. That's very difficult. And again, we want it to be hard. We want it to be hard because we don't want frivolous lawsuits to be used to punish people. Juries tend to approach these cases more emotionally and less directly tied with the law than a judge would. You occasionally will have cases where a jury will decide, to give someone $60 million because they spilled hot coffee on themselves. And you look at that from the outside, you think, well, how did the jury reach that decision? There were a number of factors that led to that, and certainly emotion is one of them. From just a pure libel defamation case, it's hard for a jury to come to the conclusion that this was done, that it was damaging, it was false, and it was done with actual malice. Both of them are so adamant of that the other one is wrong. They want this case to continue. They're not, they're not settling it. They're not dealing with it. The only other possibility at this point was that it had been dismissed along the way. And because how Virginia approaches this legally, it might have been dismissed had it been brought in California. It might have been dismissed already. This is where the jury can be influenced by emotion. Juries are terrific, and it's a wonderful form of how we do our legal system, but it's imperfect, and it always has been. But one of the things that the juries can get caught up in are moments that might not be crucial to the legal part of the case, but seem important for somebody's character or their integrity. It might be that they have this sense of, I don't believe this person because of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes when you do interviews with jurors later, they will say, well, this person just looked this way, or they did this, or they did that. Well, that's not really why we determine. It's a civil case, so we're not determining guilt, or innocence. It's whether you're liable. Is the evidence there that suggests that this person was defamed and it met these standards? And what we hope then is the judge will then come to the jury and say, okay, here's your standards that you have to address. Here's what you need to look at. Focus on this. Don't get distracted by all the other things in this case. Don't get distracted by celebrity and all this. Don't get distracted by these other elements. We want you to focus on the law. And if they somehow don't, sometimes in legal cases it may happen. That's why the appeals process is there, is because then it hits the appeals court and you just have judges who will look at this and they're really just going to focus on the law part of it. I think it's a surprise when someone wins a case like this. So Depp winning this case is surprising from a number of standpoints, and particularly the fact that, again, it's so difficult to prove actual malice. And also the fact that it is ambiguous. So what she wrote could be taken in a number of different ways. And so the jury could have looked at that and said, well, she was abused. You know, this was a highly charged, emotional, damaging relationship for both sides. But that then means that it was damaging for her side. And so she suffered abuse along the way. So for her to lose a case like this is surprising, but also the fact we have to recognize then that again, the juries, you have a greater success at the trial court level if you're the plaintiff, Depp. When it goes to the appeals court, which it will, then Heard will have a much greater chance because they will step back and look at this from a purely legal standpoint and say, did it meet the standards that are set for defamation? Judges who are considering that case will very much understand the direct implications and nuances of libel and particularly actual malice. And they'll look at this in a different way. I'm not saying they won't ultimately agree with it, but I would say that there's a much higher burden than going forward for Depp's team at the appeals court level because they will purely look at this from a legal standpoint. They're going to toss out all the emotional pieces. They're going to toss out all the any sort of fandom type of thing that comes along, and they're really just going to bear down on, did it meet the standards of defamation?